The grand drawing room at Althorpe House was hushed, the afternoon light softening the portraits of past Spencers on paneled walls. Lady Sarah McCorquodale, now 60 and matriarch of the Spencer clan, rose at the dais with a single folder clutched in trembling hands. Cameras clicked, even the creak of a leather wingback chair seemed intrusive. Then, in a voice quivering with memory and loss, she acknowledged a truth whispered for 2 decades. The existence of Princess Diana's secret diaries of destiny, handwritten reflections in which Diana confided she feared her own untimely death. When Sarah's first tear slipped down her cheek, the assembled press fell silent. At long last, she confirmed the rumors that had haunted royal watchers and fueled conspiracies since August 1997. For years, snippets of Diana's private journals had drifted into tabloids. A line here about, "On accident I cannot prevent," a cryptic reference there to predicted heartbreak on a moonlit road. The family vehemently denied their authenticity, dismissing them as forgery spun by over-eager biographers. Yet questions lingered. Why would a woman of Diana's candor keep such ominous notes unless she believed them real? Why had none of her confidentes ever shared them, despite global fascination? And most urgent of all, had those diary pages held clues that might have saved her life on that fateful night in Paris? Today's confession changed everything. With a deep breath, Sarah revealed that the diaries were genuine. Diana's meticulous entries, written between 1993 and 1997, meticulously cataloged fears she never voiced publicly. "My sister's words bring me to my knees," Sarah said, her voice breaking as she recalled the first time she read them. She wrote of a silver machine that would betray her, of a date she penciled by hand, August 31, that haunted her dreams. At that moment, Sarah wept openly, gathering strength as if to protect Diana's honor. "All these years I kept silent, reluctantly guarding her most private pain. But I can no longer let fear of scandal eclipse the truth she entrusted to paper." A flashbulbs popped as journalists fought to capture every syllable, filling in context. Sarah explained how the diaries had surfaced not through scandalous leaks, but by chance after Diana's death. Sarah had stored some of her sister's personal effects in the family's private archive. Years later, while preparing a memorial exhibition, she rediscovered a locked box stamped with Diana's initials. Inside lay 3 leather-bound volumes, Diana's own prophecies of tragedy, emotional affirmations about motherhood and reconciliation, and unfiltered hopes that future queens would honor compassion above duty. The margins brimmed with underlined passages. "Please that someone remember the girl beyond the princess, the vulnerable soul behind the title." Until now, Sarah had resisted revealing the diaries, torn between loyalty to Diana's legacy and fear that such a revelation would fuel sinister conspiracies. "I worried the world would see these writings and dismiss them as distressing predictions rather than heartfelt poetry," she admitted, eyes cast downward. "I feared the press would tear them apart, using my sister's grief to sell papers." Yet Sarah's own heartbreak, years spent fielding clandestine claims that Diana's death was anything but a tragic accident, propelled her to speak out. "If these are the last words my sister left in ink, then the world deserves to read them," she declared, officials handing out exact transcriptions to each journalist's table. This unveiling sends a shiver through the royals and the public alike. Buckingham Palace, quick to issue a guarded response, described the diaries as deeply personal reflections, and noted that any operative protections of Diana's privacy would continue. Yet the courtiers cannot ignore the torrent now unleashed. Historians scrambling to reassess timelines, conspiracy theorists seizing Sarah's words as proof of hidden machinations, mental health advocates lauding Diana's bravery in confronting her darkest thoughts. Questions swirl: had Diana confided this fear to close friends? Did she seek professional help? Or did her status render her voiceless in the very circles meant to protect her? Inside Althorpe's corridors, the Spencer family quietly grappled with the fallout. Aides escorted Sarah back to the ancestral rooms, where her niece, producer Lady Kitty Spencer, consoled her aunt with whispered reassurances. But beyond the family's grief, a wider reckoning was properly underway. As Sarah's tears dried, she issued one final plea. Read these words not as mysteries, but as the honest heartbeats of a sister, a mother, and a friend. Let them remind us that even royalty can feel helpless, that no lineage is immune to fear, and that compassion for one another must come before any protocol or palace. Within hours of Lady Sarah McCorquodale's tearful revelation, The royal archives were inundated with inquiries from historians, journalists, and mental health experts eager to examine Diana's hidden volumes. A team of Spencer-appointed scholars convened at Althorp to authenticate the manuscripts, cross-referencing penmanship with known samples of Diana's handwriting on personal letters and charity briefing notes. Experts confirmed the entries' provenance, the same delicate script, ink faded in precisely the same patterns, and the unmistakable indentation of the spiral binding that matched her private stationery. This scholarly seal of approval only intensified global fascination with the diary's contents. Excerpts released to the press revealed Diana's private fears in unsettling detail. In a 1994 passage, she wrote, "I dream of steel horses chasing me beneath neon lights. I cannot outrun the shadow I sense behind every mirror." In another entry from January 1996, she described a prophetic vision of a silver flash under Pont de Alma where she would later perish. Therapists noted these images aligned with acute anxiety rather than clairvoyance, interpreting her vivid metaphors as expressions of emotional distress rather than premonition. But conspiracy circles seized on the literal language, declaring the diaries as evidence of pre-arranged foul play rather than self-awareness of vulnerability in a volatile marriage. Back in London, palace spokespeople issued a brief statement acknowledging Sarah's disclosure while urging respect for Diana's privacy. They affirmed that any documents held privately by the Spencer family are their prerogative to share at their discretion. But they stopped short of endorsing public release of full volumes. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace historians stressed that Diana had documented her philanthropic campaigns and personal growth alongside darker ruminations, underscoring her complexity as both global icon and human being. Those reassurances did little to quell sensational headlines. Outlets around the world splashed diary excerpts across front pages beneath banners reading "Princess Prophetic Pages" and "Diana's Darkest Secrets Finally Out." On social media, an unexpected chorus of voices emerged to reclaim Diana's narrative from tabloid distortion. Mental health advocates lauded Lady Sarah for lifting the veil on shame-shrouded discussions of anxiety and self-doubt, praising the diaries as a lifeline for others wrestling with intrusive fears. A charity for survivors of trauma tweeted, "Diana's courage in inscribing her deepest anxieties reminds us that mental health struggles transcend status and title." Licensed counselors offered free webinars exploring how journaling can aid emotional processing, citing Diana's writings as a powerful case study of self-reflection. The diaries thus shifted from fodder for conspiracy to catalyst for broader dialogue about vulnerability and resilience. Royal affairs commentators debated the diary's impact on Diana's legacy. Some argued the entries tarnished her image as the composed, people's princess, suggesting her private turmoil contrasted with her public grace. Others countered that her candid self-exposure enhanced her heroic reputation, illustrating the hidden cost of global adoration and relentless scrutiny. A veteran biographer opened on BBC's The Royal Oar that no monarch or consort had ever displayed such unvarnished self-reckoning, and that historians would come to view the diaries as essential primary sources for understanding Diana's lived experience. Inside the family, the confession prompted quiet soul-searching. Jonathan Dimbleby, author of a previous Diana biography, was granted limited access to the diaries for an updated edition. He emerged with a softened perspective, penning an essay on how Diana's prophetic fears mirrored a universal human recognition of mortality. At the same time, Princess Catherine's personal aides approached Sarah, requesting background color for a planned charitable campaign on mental health. Catherine's office released a joint statement honoring Diana's memory and pledging to expand mental health services within youth outreach programs, reflecting the diary's unifying potential beyond controversy. At Althorp, Lady Sarah oversaw preparations for a controlled retelling of diary passages during a private public engagement next month. A limited edition volume, titled Diana's Reflections, was being prepared for publication under strict editorial oversight to balance transparency with decorum. Proceeds were earmarked for the Diana Award charity, with royalties directed toward therapeutic arts initiatives. Sarah insisted each published page bear context notes to prevent misinterpretation, ensuring Diana's poetic imagery would not be mined for conspiracy theories. She described this editorial approach as a sacred trust, channeling her sister's voice into a legacy of compassion and candor. Meanwhile, Public exhibitions at Kensington Palace were reimagined to include digital displays of diary imagery alongside photographs chronicling Diana's public life. Interactive kiosks allowed visitors to explore her handwritten lines digitally, with audio narration conveying the emotional timbre of each entry. Curators emphasized the diary's role in humanizing a public figure often seen through a prism of fame and tragedy. Visitors responded viscerally, many leaving tearful notes in guest books comparing Diana's courage to their own struggles with fear and doubt. As the world adjusted to this new dimension of Diana's story, speculative theories persisted in dark corners of the internet. Forums debated whether cryptic diary references to palace corridors hinted at deeper secrets behind the scenes. But for most, Lady Sarah's disclosure marked a turning point, a conscious decision to transform private grief into collective empathy. Global audiences from London to Tokyo found in Diana's pages an affirmation that fear and vulnerability cross all boundaries. And while mysteries about her death remain, the princess's own words now guide her remembrance. No longer only an icon of fairy tale romance, but a woman unafraid to write her fears in ink, asking loved ones to listen even after her voice fell silent. By midsummer, Diana's Reflections, the carefully edited volume of Princess Diana's diaries, became one of the most anticipated books of the year. Pre-orders climbed into six figures, surprising publishers who had expected modest interest following Sarah's initial disclosure. The book's introduction, penned by Lady Sarah herself, framed each journal excerpt with historical context: the date, Diana's location, and her emotional state at the time. Footnotes explained archaic references. Her use of silver machine, initially linked to an ambulance ride after a car accident, later reframed in hindsight as emblematic of her broader anxieties. This scholarly rigor earned praise from literary reviewers who noted that the diaries read as raw memoir and psychological portrait, not sensational confession. A month before publication, the Royal Literary Fund hosted a virtual panel on Princess Diana's Private Voice, featuring psychiatrists, historians, and family members. Dr. Roxanne Harper, a leading trauma psychologist, emphasized the therapeutic potential of Diana's writing. Her entries illustrate how self-reflection can serve as emotional triage, mapping fears rather than letting them roam unchecked. That perspective reframed Diana's prophetic language as coping mechanisms, vivid metaphors to contain anxiety. Historian Andrew Roberts added that the diaries offered unprecedented insights into 1990s royal life, illuminating the pressures Diana faced inside palace walls. Even seasoned royal correspondents admitted they'd never seen such unfiltered self-analysis from any senior figure. Meanwhile, Kensington Palace's multimedia exhibit, launched alongside the book's release, drew record crowds. Visitors donned earbuds to hear Diana's own voice, archival interview clips spliced with actors softly reading diary passages, while scrolling digital facsimiles of her pages. In a glass case lay the original leather-bound volumes placed under UV-filtered light. Informational placards highlighted key excerpts, her description of panic attacks, her longing for genuine friendship, and moments of hope when she wrote of her son's laughter. For many, the exhibit offered catharsis. Guestbook entries down the hall spoke of tears and solidarity, remarks like "she was human, just like me," and "thank you for trusting us with your truth." Across the pond, a documentary titled Diana's Private Hour premiered on PBS, weaving diary excerpts into interviews with close friends and mental health advocates. Producer Anne Marie Durant followed families who had used the diaries to explain anxiety and depression to younger generations. One segment featured a high school guidance counselor in Ohio reading Diana's lines about sleepless nights to a classroom, sparking a candid discussion among teens about coping strategies. The documentary's U.S. debut coincided with the book's release, reinforcing the message that Diana's personal fears could serve broader societal good. At the same time, the Diana Award Foundation announced a new grant initiative, Ink and Insight, funding creative journaling workshops for orphaned and at-risk youth. Sarah joined a launch event at a London youth center, helping young participants decorate their own leather journals. She told them, "My sister believed in writing down her truth. It saved her when she felt most alone." The program's first cohort reported improved self-esteem and communication skills, with social workers noting marked decreases in behavioral incidents. Media coverage lauded the initiative as living tribute to Diana's bravery and highlighted Sarah's evolving role as mental health advocate. On social platforms, amateur celebs scanned diary excerpts for hints of previously unknown palace dramas. Conspiracy-oriented channels speculated that certain entries hinted at cover-ups. Language like closed doors and coin corridors fueled clickbait trailers claiming Diana documented dangerous secrets. However, fact-checkers quashed wild theories by pointing to Sarah's footnotes, which clarified that those passages referred to Diana's personal feelings of isolation, not covert conspiracies. This clear editorial framing helped steer public discourse away from sensationalism toward empathy. In royal circles, the diaries reignited debates over privacy and public duty. Prince William, briefed by aides on the diary's dual impact, discreetly encouraged Catherine to launch a mental health campaign aligned with Diana's unspoken vision. In October, Kensington Palace unveiled Speak Your Mind, a youth-focused initiative providing confidential counseling and creative writing outlets. Prince William praised Diana's courage, calling her diaries a beacon showing how vulnerability can become a strength. He noted that sharing those private pages, under careful stewardship, had encouraged others to speak up about their struggles. On university campuses, Diana's reflections sparked term papers across disciplines. Political science students wrote about the diary's revelations on royal public relations. English majors analyzed Diana's poetic metaphors. Psychology undergraduates designed experimental studies measuring the diary's impact on stigma reduction. Conferences featured papers on The Princess and the Pen, exploring how selective publication of private writings balances historical record with personal dignity. Academics praised Sarah's editorial approach, neither bowdlerized nor voyeuristic, as a gold standard for handling sensitive materials by public figures. As the diary's influence radiated outward, Lady Sarah McCorquodale prepared for the final chapter of her stewardship, a secure digital archive granting controlled academic access to researchers. Metadata tags would enable keyword searches, anxiety, motherhood, palace, while encryption protocols protected the journal's integrity. Sarah insisted that this archive serve future generations, ensuring Diana's reflections remained accessible yet respected as private texts. She described it as the last gift I can offer my sister's memory, a bridge between her inner world and ours, built on trust and reverence. As autumn deepened across Britain, Diana's reflections continued to reshape public and private conversations about grief, resilience, and the power of personal narrative. In October, the Royal College of Psychiatrists hosted an international symposium titled Narrative Healing and Public Memory, using Diana's diaries as a case study in therapeutic self-disclosure. Leading clinicians presented research showing that individuals who read carefully annotated passages from Diana's journals reported reduced stigma around discussing anxiety, depression, and personal fear. In one study, participants were asked to write brief reflections on their own emotional challenges before and after reading sessions. Researchers found a significant increase in self-compassion scores, indicating that Diana's courageous honesty encouraged readers to treat their own vulnerabilities with kindness rather than shame. Simultaneously, the Diana Award Foundation launched a new fellowship program called Spencer's Sanctuary, offering retreats where mental health professionals guided small groups to write expressive journals. Held in serene settings such as the Lake District and the Scottish Highlands, these retreats combined nature therapy with creative writing exercises modeled on Diana's diary entries. Participants were given leather-bound notebooks mirroring the princess's volumes, along with prompts that encouraged them to articulate internal fears and hopes. Feedback surveys revealed that 87% of attendees experienced measurable improvements in mood regulation and interpersonal communication. One fellow described her experience sitting by a lock, writing what truly scares me. Knowing Diana once did the same helped me release burdens I'd carried in silence. Meanwhile, in cinemas and cultural festivals, Diana's private hour found a second life. After its PBS debut, the documentary was acquired by several European broadcasters and featured in film festivals across Spain, Germany, and Italy. Panels with the director, Anne-Marie Durant, brought local mental health experts together with royal biographers to dissect the diary's psychological and historical dimensions. At the Venice Film Festival, Durant discussed the ethical imperative of handling posthumous materials with sensitivity, referencing Sarah's methodical editorial approach. Critics praised the film not only as a revealing portrait of Diana, but also as a blueprint for documentary ethics, demonstrating how to balance personal privacy with the public good. In the art world, a traveling exhibition titled Behind the Ink opened in Manchester's People's History Museum. The exhibit juxtaposed facsimiles of Diana's original writings with contemporary artworks by women artists exploring themes of fear and courage. One installation featured a series of glass panels etched with diary fragments, illuminated from behind to evoke the fragile translucence of memory. Visitors could use touchscreen kiosks to explore digital reproductions of the diaries, zooming in on marginalia and reading Sarah's annotations on historical context. Educators incorporated the exhibit into secondary school field trips, guiding students in discussions about the intersections of personal narrative, history, and empathy. Conversations about privacy and consent grew more nuanced. In December, a feature-length interview with Lady Sarah aired on ITV's documentary Strand, where she spoke candidly about the complexities of sharing Diana's innermost thoughts. Sarah emphasized the family's decision-making process. We balanced our duty to preserve Diana's dignity with the opportunity to advance mental health awareness. Every page was weighed with the knowledge that this was her voice, and we were merely its guardians. Media analysts noted that Sarah's measured tone and transparency helped steer coverage away from sensationalism and toward respectful engagement with Diana's legacy. By year's end, the diaries had also found a place in academic literature. A special issue of the Journal of Historical Biography was devoted entirely to Diana's reflections. Submissions ranged from literary analysis of her poetic metaphors to sociological studies on her influence in reframing stigma. One essay examined the diaries alongside feminist memoirs of the late 20th century, arguing that Diana's approach blended regal duty with candid vulnerability, creating a new genre of public autobiography. Another contribution dissected the diary's narrative structure, highlighting how Diana's entries followed an arc akin to expressive writing therapies, beginning with raw description, moving to analytical insight, and concluding with hopeful resolutions. As the chapter of Diana's reflections advanced into its final phases, Lady Sarah looked forward to a collaborative project in development, a digital theater adaptation of selected diary passages. Playwrights were working with theater companies in London's West End and New York's Off-Broadway scene to transform her words into monologues, interwoven with multimedia projections of archival footage. Anna Smith, a director attached to the London production, described the vision. "We want audiences to experience Diana's voice embodied on stage, accompanied by live musical underscore, so that her internal journey resonates in shared physical space." The debut, scheduled for spring, promises a poignant and immersive testament to Diana's enduring capacity to connect hearts across generations and continents. As the new year dawned, the influence of Diana's reflections continued to expand into fresh domains. Literary circles arranged salon-style readings, inviting actors to recite selected diary entries in living rooms and libraries. One event at the British Library paired readings of Diana's handwritten pages with readings from Virginia Woolf's diaries, exploring parallels in confessional prose and the creative impulse to document inner life. Guests lingered over tea afterward, sharing reflections on how private writing can illuminate shared human struggles. Organizers reported record attendance, noting that Diana's example encouraged attendees to revisit their own journals or begin writing for the first time. In parallel, digital platforms embraced the diaries with innovative programming. A popular mental health podcast launched a 6-episode miniseries called Diana's Ink, each installment focusing on a different emotional theme: fear, loss, hope, healing, love, and legacy, using diary excerpts as prompts for guided reflection. Listeners responded with thousands of voicemail messages describing how Diana's words gave them courage to seek therapy, support groups, or simply speak openly about anxiety. The podcast's host, Dr. Michelle Grant, credited Sarah's careful contextualization for making it safe for listeners to approach such intimate material. "We treated the diaries not as royal curiosities," Grant explained, "but as living documents that invite compassion for ourselves and others." Meanwhile, across Europe, universities adopted Diana's reflections in courses on archival ethics and memory studies. At the University of Bologna, a master's class in public history required students to curate a digital exhibit based on a diary excerpt, challenging them to consider how to balance historical authenticity with respect for privacy. At the Central European University in Budapest, a seminar examined the diaries alongside Cold War-era dissident samizdat memoirs, drawing comparisons between personal writing under surveillance and the constraints Diana faced within royal protocol. Faculty praised Sarah's editorial framework for modeling best practices in responsible curation of sensitive documents. Cultural festivals also integrated diary-inspired programming. The Edinburgh International Book Festival hosted an author panel titled Diaries as Data, featuring Lady Sarah alongside novelists who used journals as source material. Panelists debated the merits and pitfalls of drawing on personal archives. Sarah recounted speaking with the festival's organizing committee about finding the right balance between revelation and discretion, ensuring Diana's words would inspire without exploiting her vulnerability. Festival goers packed the hall, eager to witness the unorthodox inclusion of a royal family member in a literary conversation on personal narrative and ethical stewardship. Philanthropic extensions of the Diana Award Foundation's work appeared in the form of journal jars, community installations where people could anonymously deposit brief written fragments, sentiments or worries, on slips of paper. Local councils in Manchester and Cardiff installed decorative glass jars in town squares, decorated with Diana-inspired motifs. Social workers found that the act of symbolically sharing burdens with a collective container facilitated candid group discussions in mental health workshops. Annie's nephew, Spencer Matthews, tweeted a photo of his own note among the jars, captioned, "My aunt's bravery permits me to share my own story in public for the first time." Stage adaptations also gained momentum. The planned digital theater production advanced steadily toward its spring debut. Rehearsals in London's Old Vic rehearsal studios involved actors experimenting with integrating video projections of diary pages behind them, creating ghostly backdrops of Diana's script. Composer Hannah Peel was commissioned to write an original score, blending soft piano motifs with subtle electronic textures, underscoring the emotional tenor of Diana's reflections. Director Anna Smith described early audience reactions from workshop previews as profoundly moved, reporting that even actors found themselves choked up by the first-hand intimacy of the words. Producers earmarked a portion of ticket sales for mental health charities, further tying each performance to Diana's own advocacy in life. On campus, the digital archive of Diana's diaries welcomed its first cohort of accredited researchers. Applications poured in from graduate students in gender studies, psychology, history, and journalism, each enthusiastic to explore primary source material in responsible context. Sarah convened an advisory board including Dr. Harper and historians like Professor Catherine Hall to review data, access protocols, ensuring research projects preserved Diana's dignity. Projects ranged from analyses of pregnancy anxieties in elite women to mapping the geography of castle residences featured in Diana's entries. The board emphasized that every dissertation rooted in these diaries should contribute positively to public understanding rather than sensationalism. Global musical homages continued as well. Songwriters in Australia composed a short symphonic suite based on diary themes, weaving orchestral passages titled Panic Within Marble Walls and Silver Shadows on the Sign. Performances by youth orchestras in Sydney were live-streamed with translations of the English journal fragments projected onto screen, enabling audiences to connect lyrics and legacy seamlessly. Similar projects emerged in South Africa and Brazil, where community choirs performed arrangements of Diana's poetic reflections set to original melodies. These musical works underscored the diary's universal resonance, transcending cultural and linguistic barriers. By mid-year, the almost heaven sensation that began with Diana's reflections had matured into an enduring global dialogue on mental health, narrative integrity, and the ethical stewardship of personal legacy. Lady Sarah's unwavering commitment to preserving her sister's voice, balanced with scholarly precision and compassionate framing, had transformed private writings into catalysts for empathy, healing, and creative collaboration. For audiences young and old, the diaries had become more than relics of royal tragedy. They had become mirrors reflecting shared vulnerabilities and shared hope. As arrangements for the digital theater adaptation finalized and archives welcomed new inquiries, the world recognized that Princess Diana's most lasting gift was not crowns or charities, but the courage to write her truth, and Sarah's gift was the bravery to share it. As the seasons turned once more, Diana's reflections reached its most far-reaching phase yet. In late summer, the digital theater adaptation premiered simultaneously in London's West End and New York's Off-Broadway scene, drawing standing ovations for its seamless blend of spoken diary passages and immersive multimedia design. Audiences sat under constellation, like projections of palace ceilings as actors embodied Diana's words, while live string quartets underscored her most poignant lines about solitude and inner strength. Reviews hailed the production as revelatory encounter with the human heart, and the definitive tribute to a princess whose voice transcended protocol. Tickets sold out weeks in advance, with proceeds supporting the Diana Award Foundation's expanded mental health initiatives. Meanwhile, the secure digital archive opened its doors to accredited researchers. Scholars from 8 countries completed peer-reviewed studies accessing metadata tags on anxiety, motherhood, and public gaze. One groundbreaking paper analyzed biometric responses of readers encountering pre- and post-annotated diary passages, showing that contextual framing by Sarah improved emotional engagement and reduced sensationalist reaction. Another investigation explored the intersection of royal pageantry and private fear, arguing that Diana's reflections belong to a new literary tradition of confessional writing. At a global conference in Vienna, presenters credited the archive's ethical protocols as a model for future scholarly use of sensitive personal materials. In local communities, the Journal Jar's installations were reborn as interactive podcasts. Enthusiasts dialed into stations where volunteers read anonymous submissions alongside Diana's own entries on courage and compassion. These recordings, edited into monthly episodes, fostered ongoing dialogues on coping with loss and advocating for systemic mental health care. Postal letters from listeners recounted how hearing others' fears in Diana's vernacular eased their own burdens. The project's producers, echoing Sarah's call to listen carefully, planned international licensing for radio networks. On the philanthropic front, the Annie Denver Foundation unveiled its endowment fund, seeded by royalties from Diana's reflections and box office share of the theater productions. This endowment guaranteed perpetual funding for journaling workshops, community storytelling grants, and fellowship travel scholarships, ensuring that the movement would endure beyond a single generation. Sarah described it as the anchor that will carry Diana's courage into new chapters of healing. Foundation board members, including former grant recipients, met at Althorpe in harvest season to commit to 5 years of program continuity and innovation. Educationally, the diaries were now standard in secondary school curricula in the UK, Canada, and Australia. Teachers incorporated annotated editions into lessons on autobiography, prompting students to compose journal entries in Diana's spirit. One teacher in Melbourne wrote, "Students reported feeling empowered to express challenges that had previously felt taboo." Pedagogical studies confirmed that using Diana's writings as examples reduced stigma around mental health conversations in classrooms. Educational publishers planned updated digital textbooks featuring interactive diary simulations and embedded audio commentaries from Diana Award Fellows. Global musical homages continued as well. Songwriters in Australia composed a short symphonic suite based on diary themes, weaving orchestral passages titled "Panic Within Marble Walls" and "Silver Shadows on the Sign." Performances by youth orchestras in Sydney were live-streamed with translations of the English journal fragments projected onto screens, enabling audiences to connect lyrics and legacy seamlessly. Similar projects emerged in South Africa and Brazil, where community choirs performed arrangements of Diana's poetic reflections set to original melodies. These musical works underscored the diary's universal resonance, transcending cultural and linguistic barriers. Sarah McCorquodale continued to guide the project's trajectory with quiet determination. She hosted a webinar for archivists and mental health professionals on best practices in handling sensitive personal documents, emphasizing the importance of consent, context, and ongoing dialogue with stakeholders. Colleagues praised her as a model for ethical leadership, noting that her stewardship had transformed a private sorrow into a public force for good. In her closing remarks, she quoted a final line from Diana's last diary volume: "Carry love with every step, even when the road is unseen." As the new year dawned, literary circles arranged salon-style readings, inviting actors to recite selected diary entries in living rooms and libraries. One event at the British Library paired readings of Diana's handwritten pages with excerpts from Virginia Woolf's diaries, exploring parallels in confessional prose and the impulse to document inner life. Guests lingered over tea afterward, sharing reflections on how private writing can illuminate shared human struggles. Organizers reported record attendance, noting that Diana's example encouraged attendees to revisit their own journals or begin writing for the first time. In parallel, digital platforms embraced the diaries with innovative programming. A popular mental health podcast launched a 6-episode miniseries called Diana's Inc., each installment focusing on a different emotional theme: fear, loss, hope, healing, love, and legacy, using diary excerpts as prompts for guided reflection. Listeners responded with thousands of voicemail messages describing how Diana's words gave them courage to seek therapy, support groups, or simply speak openly about anxiety. The podcast's host, Dr. Michelle Grant, credited Sarah's careful contextualization for making it safe for listeners to approach such intimate material. "We treated the diaries not as royal curiosities," Grant explained, "but as living documents that invite compassion for ourselves and others." Meanwhile, across Europe, universities adopted Diana's reflections in courses on archival ethics and memory studies. At the University of Bologna, a master's class in public history required students to curate a digital exhibit based on a diary excerpt, challenging them to consider how to balance historical authenticity with respect for privacy. At the Central European University in Budapest, a seminar examined the diaries alongside Cold War-era samizdat memoirs, drawing comparisons between personal writing under scrutiny and the constraints Diana faced within royal protocol. Faculty praised Sarah's editorial framework for modeling best practices and responsible curation of sensitive documents. Cultural festivals also integrated diary-inspired programming. The Edinburgh International Book Festival hosted an author panel titled Diaries as Data, featuring Lady Sarah alongside novelists who use journals as source material. Panelists debated the merits and pitfalls of drawing on personal archives. Sarah recounted speaking with the festival's organizers about finding the right balance between revelation and discretion, ensuring Diana's words would inspire without exploiting her vulnerability. Festival goers packed the hall, eager to witness the unorthodox inclusion of a royal family member in a literary conversation on personal narrative and ethical stewardship. Philanthropic extensions continued in the form of journal jars, community installations where people could anonymously deposit brief written fragments, sentiments, or worries on slips of paper. Local councils in Manchester and Cardiff installed decorative glass jars in town squares decorated with Diana-inspired motifs. Social workers found that the act of symbolically sharing burdens with a collective container facilitated candid group discussions in mental health workshops. Annie's nephew, Spencer Matthews, tweeted a photo of his own note among the jars, captioned, "My aunt's bravery permits me to share my own story in public for the first time." Stage adaptations gained momentum with a digital theater production nearing its spring debut. Rehearsals in London's Old Vic studios involved actors experimenting with video projections of diary pages behind them, creating ghostly backdrops of Diana's script. Composer Hannah Peel was commissioned to write an original score blending soft piano motifs with subtle electronic textures, underscoring the emotional tenor of Diana's reflections. Early workshop previews moved both actors and invited audiences to tears, testament to the first-hand intimacy of the words. Producers earmarked a portion of ticket sales for mental health charities, reinforcing Diana's advocacy in life. Educational initiatives flourished with the Digital Archive welcoming its first cohort of accredited researchers. Applications poured in from graduate students in gender studies, psychology, history, and journalism, each enthusiastic to explore primary source material in responsible context. Sarah convened an advisory board, including leading psychologists and historians, to review data access protocols, ensuring research projects preserved Diana's dignity. Approved studies range from analyses of pregnancy anxieties in elite women to mapping the geography of royal residences featured in Diana's entries. Global musical homages continued with songwriters in Australia composing symphonic suites based on diary themes, weaving orchestral passages called Carnations and Courage, and pouring snowflakes on Windsor. Youth orchestras in Sydney livestreamed their performances with translated diary excerpts projected onto screens, enabling audiences to connect lyrics and legacy seamlessly. Similar projects emerged in South Africa and Brazil, where community choirs performed arrangements of Diana's poetic reflections set to original melodies, underscoring the diary's universal resonance. Sarah McCorquodale's leadership remained constant. She hosted a webinar for archival professionals on best practices in handling sensitive documents, emphasizing consent, context, and stakeholder dialogue. Peers lauded her ethical stewardship, noting how Diana's private vulnerability had become a public force for good. In her final address of the series, she quoted a line from Diana's last volume, "Carry love with every step even when the road is unseen." Her legacy, carefully shared through these pages, transforms loss into legacy, inviting every reader to embrace honesty as act of love. In Diana's words, we discover sorrow and the promise of human connection renewed.